Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. So we are on up to Daf Chaf Hey, Amud Aleph near the top. Going back to the discussion regarding Tzeidah, regarding trapping, regarding we're going to talk today about Zimun. Zimun, not in the sense of Zimun that you make after your bench, but the word Hazmana means something that is ready. Essentially, something which is Hazmana is the opposite of Muktzah, right? Something which we've spoken many times. Muktzah means something that is set aside. Set aside, it's out of my mind, it's out of my thoughts. It's not something that I intend to use on Yom Tov. The opposite of that would be something which is mukhan, something which is prepared in order to make something prepared. So we have what's called hazmana, which is you essentially go and you designate it before Yom Tov or before Shabbat in order that it should not be muktzeh. This discussion, big discussion. Our sugya here is one of the main is one of the sources of this in terms of what is required for the act of zimun. Is it enough? And we'll see in different contexts. Is it enough that I just think in my head that I want to use this object, or I want to use this animal, or do I have to go and perform a maaseh? Do I have to go and do an action? To show that it's something. I'll give you just an example, not actually to do with the sugi at all, but just comes to mind. We're in the 30 days before Pesach now. I alluded to this briefly before between Mincha Maariv the other day, but we have a similar discussion when it comes to chametz. So we know that any chametz which is edible is certainly considered chametz. Chametz which is nifsal me'achilat kelev, right? Certainly before Pesach. But if it's not ra'oi l'ma'achal kelev, it's become pagum, it's blemished, it's not right. That is no longer considered chametz, at least in terms of the prohibition of owning chametz, ubayir el bayir matzeh. There is a discussion whether if you had chametz which was nifsal, could you then go and eat it? This is a machloket rishonim, because there are those who say, what do you mean? It's nifsal, it's not chametz anymore. And then there are those who say, no, the minute that you eat it, that's what's called achshave. You are giving it significance by doing that. But in order to own it, that would certainly not be a problem. This is when it comes to all the discussions about trufot, for example. Tablets that don't have a taste. Even if they have chametz in, there's no prohibition of owning them. If I have just an ordinary Acamol, Nurofen, or whatever, most of those things do not have any chametz ingredients. But even if it's a tablet which has no taste or a capsule, right? Even if it was to have some chametz ingredient inside, there's no prohibition of owning it whatsoever. You don't need to sell those medicines for chametz. If it's a syrup, if it has taste, that's a different case. But again, taking it, swallowing it, okay, that's a different shaila. But owning it, there's no issue. So the Gemara in Pesachim has discussion about something what's called a kofet sa'or, right? Where it's this big batch of dough, and you use it for sitting on, right? It was dough, but now it's no one's going to eat it. You're going to sit on it. So that the Gemara says you wouldn't be. So the case is that you covered it up with tit. You covered it up with sort of like cement or something, and then you use it to sit on. There's no issue of bayir el bayir matzis. The question is it enough? The fact that nobody intends to eat it, or there has to be an action in this case? It's covered up with tit, with cement. Do I have to do that action as well? Right? And I just mentioned that, and then we spoke about it in the context of chametz in the bins, and this comes up with all discussions about cosmetics and different things. But I just mentioned that because of the similarity in terms of, is it enough of what I have in one's mind, or do I have to have an action as well? So we have a similar discussion here when it comes to zimun. We're dealing specifically with zimun of animals, and we're talking about Yom Tov. Why Yom Tov and not Shabbat? Because on Yom Tov you're allowed to do shechita, right? The animal won't be muktzah because you can go and you can do shechita and you can eat it for your Yom Tov meal. Which you obviously can't do on Shabbat, but that would only be if the animal wasn't muktzah in the first place, right? As we've seen already from the first Mishnah, we've seen discussion about animals that could be muktzah. So let's pick it up. One daf kaf hey amud aleph, 3 lines from the top. Okay, says the Gemara, Marav, hasocher amat amayim me'erev yom tov, ulemachal ishkim u'matzah badagim mutarin. Because you have an amat amayim, you have this area of water. And it's a socher amatamai, means you close it up. You close up the pond or whatever on before. Let's assume you have a pond that's connected to a larger area. It's going to go flow into the river, right? You close it up before Yom Tov. And what does that mean? That means that whatever fish are in the pond before Yom Tov are the ones that will be in the pond on Yom Tov. No, nobody can get in and nobody can get out. It's like the streets of Rechavia these days, right? It's all closed up from both sides. Nobody can get in, nobody can get out. So says Rashi here, "Sochei amat hamayim, sotma shelo yikansu badagim." You close it up so that the fish can't get in mibachutz. The fish can't now get in from outside. Mishtachshach. Once it gets dark, once it's Yom Tov, vet eile hechin vezmin elidei maseh. Okay, so the fish that are currently in the pond, by closing up the pond, that is the action which you've done. That's equivalent of a hazmana. You've shown that you are designated by closing it up. You don't want other fish to come in, and you've shown that you are designating the fish that are in the pond, so that would be okay. So therefore, says Rav, and the next morning you wake up and you find fish in it, right? What's the chiddush? The chiddush is that even if when you went and you closed it up, I don't know, the fish were hiding, whatever, I didn't see them. But so long as I've done this action before Yom Tov, now on Yom Tov I see the fish. Okay, the fact that I closed it up, that shows that whatever fish may or may not be there, or may be there, those are the ones that I want to that I want on Yom Tov, and they will not be muktzah as a result. Okay, so that is now the question is whether we can learn from this, in this case of Rav, whether we can extrapolate this to other animals as well. So says the Gemara now, Amar Rav Chizda, midivrei Rabbeinu nilmod chaya shekinana b'pardes ena tzarcha zimun. Okay, so Rav Chizda says we can learn from, interesting, it says from divrei Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu, yeah, refers to Rav. Now Rashi points out, Rashi says midivrei Rabbeinu. He says that means Rav. Tishloshtan. There are three. Right, Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, Rav Nachman. They're all talmidim of Rav. Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, Rav Nachman. The Kari Lei Rav Chizda, Chavrin talmidin shel Rav Avu. So Rav Huna, Rav Chizda, Rav Nachman are all talmidim of Rav. So Rav Chizda says from the words of Rav we've learned. What did Rav say? He said Asochei matamai me'erev Yom Tov. That was his case. So from there we've learned that chaya shekinana b'pardes, you have an animal which is nesting in a pardes. He says einat tzricha zimun. That animal would not require zimun before Yom Tov. Why not? So says Rashi here, but pardes. What is this pardes that we're talking about? This is makom mishtamer. It's I guess it's a sort of a small, sort of enclosed area. This animal, which is nesting, and it's going to have it's got babies, young offspring. We assume that the vlad cannot get out, and therefore it's easy to go and trap it, or it's easy to go and catch it. In other words, there would not be a violation of trapping, as we discussed at the beginning of the parak. And therefore it does not need to be designated. Why? Because we're talking about this orchard, this area which is enclosed, and just like we saw the case by the fish, that over there it's enclosed, and therefore you don't need any more specific action to do the zimun, to do the designation. So too here. In other words, what we learn from Rav is the fact that the animal cannot get out. That's already called mukhan. So lakame parich. Now the Gemara is going to challenge this. Rashi tells me already now. The zimun gadol huzeh shoseh maseh l'shem hazmana. Meaning, with the case of Rav, it's true that you didn't go and you didn't pick up the fish and say, I'm designating this fish. But what did you do? You closed off the area. It's not, we're going to ask right now the question. It's not necessarily the fact that the area was closed. It's the fact that you closed it off. And the chiddush was that maaseh was enough for hazmana, but you still had to do a maaseh. Right, so that's exactly that's not what Rav Chizda wants to learn from Rav. Rav Chizda wants to learn from Rav that the minute that it's enclosed, so just like these fish are enclosed, so too this animal is enclosed. Why does it have to be the vlad? Why does it have to be the offspring? Because seemingly the mother animal is bigger and is able to escape. Right, so that's a separate issue. He says the offspring because there's no issue of seidah, but he says there would be no issue of hazmana as well. That is what Rav Chizda says. So now it says the Gemara. So Rav Nachman nafal chavrin beravrita. Rav Nachman says our friend, Rav Chisda, because they were both Talmidim of Rav. He says, you have fallen in Ravrata means a great matter. You made a big mistake. Says Rashi Beravrata, right? Nichnas Rosho lemachlokot gdolot. You've put your head into big arguments. Shiubu alav. You're going to cause a big machlokit here. You made a mistake. Bezot olakam mesem kushia. Right afterwards, we're going to explain what the question is. Okay, we're going to see a different, according to Rashi's Girsa, we have a different version of this before we get to the Kasha, which is a different Amara saying it. So he says here, right, exactly. That was Rav Chisda who said it. So now it says the Gemara Ikad Amri. We have a different Girsa. Then it's not Rav Chisda, but it's Amar Rabba Bar Huna. Same thing. So Amar Rav Nachman Afal Bar Chavrin Beravrata. Okay, so what is the problem? What is Rav Nachman's kasha on whether it's Rav Chisda or whether it's Rabba Bar Huna? So he says, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Nachman Nafal B'Chavim B'Ravata. He says, Hatam lo ka'avid ma'aseh. Hacha ka'avid ma'aseh. That's exactly the difference. You're telling me you need a designation. What does the husband mean? What does the designation mean? It means that you have to go and you have to go and do something. So we're used to, and as we'll see now, when it comes to the Gemara discusses, when it comes to birds, you have to go up, you have to find the bird that you want, you have to tie it up, or you have to lift it up, and you have to shake it, and you have to go take the actual bird in your hand. Yeah, we're saying you don't have to take the fish in your hand, it's enough to close it off. But the point is, not like Rav Chisda or Rav Huna was saying, that the fact that it's closed up, that's already Asmana. He says, no, you have to go and do an action. So the action there was closing up for the fish. That's enough. But yeah, you can't compare that to the case of the animal. Right? Hatam kavid ma'aseh, hatam lo kavid ma'aseh, acha kavid ma'aseh. Right, and now we're going to go and we're going to challenge it even more. It says, aside from the fact that there's a difference between the two cases, says the Gemara, "V'lo b'yazimun," says, really, can you say such a thing? Can you say that you don't need to designate when it comes to an animal? V'atanya. Didn't we learn in a Braita as follows? Chaya shekinena b'pardes tzricha lezamen. Okay, there you have it explicitly. You want to say, Rav Chisda, Rabba Bar Huna, you want to say you want to extrapolate from the din that Rav says regarding fish into regard to the animal that's in the pardes. But we have an explicit Braita that tells us, right? Chaya shekinena b'pardes tzricha lezamen. You have to go and you have to designate the animal. וציפור דרור צריך לקשור בכנפיה כדי שלא תתחלף בעמה. If you're dealing with animals. And if you're dealing with birds, right, the ציפור דרור, type of bird, you have to go tie it to its wings כדי שלא תתחלף באמה. In order that you won't get it confused with its mother, you won't get it confused with a different animal. Right, ציפור דרור says Rashi, שזימנה מבעוד יום, צריך לקשור בכנפיה להיות סימן לה. You need to go and tie up a string to its wings so that you have a siman, that you know which it is. Okay, not just that, says the Braita, זו עדות שהעידו מפי שמעיה ואבטליון. Okay, no less. And this is as was said by Shmaya Avtalion. So therefore, says the Gemara, Tiyufta, right? That is a contradiction. There is no we don't have an answer to that. Meaning, what Rav Chisda suggested that you don't need zimun, we have a complete contradiction on that because we have a Braita that says that you do. But says the Gemara, now I'm going to say, so we have that Braita, but now we're going to challenge it from a different direction. It says mi by zimun. It says, is it really true? Is this Braita actually correct that the Vlad? Right, that's what we're dealing with. We have this chaya shekinana, this animal which is nesting, and therefore and gave birth. That the offspring does not need that the offspring does need zimun. Who says we're now going to bring a Braita which seems to contradict that. And the Braita is as follows. Really, it's Tosefta says as follows. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Mudim Beit Shammai. We're about halfway down the narrow lines of the page. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Mudim Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. El sheizminan betoch haken. Umatzah lifnei haken. She'asurin. Okay, we're going back to discuss this discussion about birds. We saw this back in the first parak. If you have the white birds and you have the black birds, and if you find them, if you designate them before Shabbat, before Yom Tov, and you come and you find them in the nest, outside the nest, that was the whole discussion over there. So we say, Rosh Hashanah says, Modim Beit Shammai Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel both agree because they have differences of opinion, yeah, but they both agree. Al she's minan betoch haken. If you designated the birds that were inside the nest, umatzah lifnei haken, and you found them outside the nest or the sort of enclosure, right? Look at Rashi. Rashi says, "Matzah lifnei haken shasurin." You found them in front of this nest, then they'd be forbidden. He says, "Kedematzin ala pel kama," as we explained in the first parak on Daf Yud Amud Bet, all the way back there. He says, "Shayu shnei kinin v'zimen et zo v'lo zimen et zo." There were two separate nests or cages or whatever, and you designated the birds in one, but not the birds in the other. Ulamachar ba, and he comes back the next day, comes back on Yom Tov, matzah b'mezumenet v'lo b'mkoman, and you find in the nest or in the area where you had designated them, they aren't actually in the place where they were. Ela b'dafa bolet lifnei haken. You find they're this sort of area that's in front of the nest. They're all there. Ubechaveta, and in the other one, lo matzah klum. They aren't there. So in such a case, we said it's forbidden. Maybe they came from one place to the other. Okay, so that's the case, and therefore we say that's asur because we're not sure if any of those birds are the ones that you were designated at all. So Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Modim Beit Shammai Beit Hillel al shezminan betoch haken u'matzah lifnei haken she'asurin. So b'mei dvarim amurim. What are we talking about? We're talking about b'yonei shovach, v'yonei aliyah, v'tziporim shekinu b'tapechinu b'bilra. Okay, the different types of birds, or based on the types of birds they are, or where they are, sort of, right? Aval avazim v'tarnagolim v'yonei haldasiyot. But if we're dealing with ducks and chickens and these Herodian doves, v'chaya shekinana b'pardes mutalin. In those cases, with those animals, it is mutal. Okay, and that includes the chaya shekinah. But again, why over there is mutal? Because we assume these are more sort of domesticated animals. We assume they aren't going to leave. Okay, but what you see from there is that we include chaya shekinana b'pardes. Right? All of these are mutalim ve'en tzarchin zimun, meaning these ones don't need zimun at all in the first place because these animals are there and they're. We assume that one had them already. One already had them in mind before Yom Tov came in. So, וציפור דור צריכה לקשר בכנפיה כדי שלא תתחלף בעמה, ומקושרים ומנועננים בבורות ובביתין ובשכין ובמעלות מוטלין. ובאילנות אסור שמא יעלה ויתלוש. והמקושרים והמנענעים בכל מקום אסור משום גזע. Okay, so just to finish it off, the sefta, so it's giving different examples. So we said in terms of these wild birds, they would need zimun, and then we said in terms of these more domesticated ones, which includes the chaya shekinah bardes, that you don't need zimun, right? And then it said if we have a tzipor dlul, this is a bird that flies around a lot. Says Rashi, tzipor dlul ktanai, it's a small bird, va'em ve'abat shavot. That it's a very, very small bird. So the mother bird and the offspring are going to be the same size. They're going to look the same. So that's why there, that's why you're going to need to put a siman. You need to tie a piece of string to it so that you know which is the bird that you've designated. Okay. Then, those which are tied. Right? Is that what we just said? It says Rashi, Bekanfehem simanulem. You've tied on the wings as a siman to know which birds they are. Na'in means those you've gone and shaken. We spoke about this is the hasmana. You went to the birds before. You picked up the bird and you shook it a little bit to show that's the one you wanted, right? and therefore you know which is which. Aminu Na'in says Rashi me'etmol, did it before Yom Tov, l'shem zimun v'umakilam. So where would these birds be? Babolot, ubabatim. It says Rashi, b'kol makom she'eno mechubal, any place where it's not connected to the ground, it's not sort of enclosed, but it's in the homes or in the caves, etc., mutalin, those are allowed. But ilanot, but if they're on the trees, asulin shema yalev yitlosh. That is a forbidden, because you might go and you might go trying to get them. You might go and tear off a branch from the tree. But if there are other places, these birds, even if they're tied up, whatever, then you can't go and get them because of geza. Rashi says, which are in any other place, af b'chol asurin lemotzan, mishum gezer shalishon shekashan onana, meaning you find a bird and it's got a thing tied onto its wings or whatever, so somebody else came and did it. Somebody, or the first person who tied it, or came and lifted it up, kna'an bagbatan, they did a masekinyan with the hagbah, shehefka nikneh bagbah. So don't think those birds are going to be hefka, but somebody's already come and has already claimed them before Yom Tov. In any event, why do we bring this whole Tosefta? Because we wanted to say, we're dealing with now the Chayasha Kinanab Pardes. We're talking about these animals that are nesting in this Pardes, this orchard which is enclosed. Right? First, we wanted to extrapolate from the din of Rav regarding closing off the pond, that these animals also are not going to need hazmana. And then we said, no, there's no proof, because of the point you did a maaseh, and you don't do a maaseh. And furthermore, we have a bright that says that they do need hazmana. Okay, and we left it at that. But now we have the Tosefta, which actually says explicitly that when it comes to chaya shekinana pardes, right? We said mutalin. We said there is no zimun required. You don't need to designate them. So do you need to designate them, or do you not need to designate them? That's the question. That's the contradiction. So now says the Gemara we were the second of the wide lines, halfway through the line. It says Amar Rav Nachman lo kasha. Rav Nachman says there's no difficulty. Ha be'ima. When we talk about an animal that's nesting, so are we talking about the mother animal, or are we talking about the offspring? And that's going to be the difference whether we say that you need hazmana or you don't need hazmana, right? The Baraita that says we don't need hazmana, that is talking about the Vlad. That's talking about the offspring, because that can't, because that's not going to be able to run away. And then you had in mind that you were going to go and take that one. But the one says you do need hazmana, that's talking about the mother. So, all right, ha ba ha be'ima. Says Rashi, ba bavlad eino tzarich zimun. When it comes to the offspring, therefore you don't need zimun. She'ena yochla levuach, it can't run away. V'datei aleh. And therefore you had it in mind that you were going to go take that animal. Aval ima shigdolas shechazimun, but the mother that's big and it's able to get away, that you would need to designate beforehand. So now says the Gemara, wait a minute, but ima bezimun zagila. If for the mother, is it enough just to do zimun, just to designate it? Tzeda ma'aliutabaya. If it can get away, if it's able to run away, so you're going to have to trap it. Right, so that's another issue. So Elamar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Edi ve'edi bedida. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says no. So you're right. Both of them are talking about bedida, meaning both. It says Rashi bavlad, but the mother you have to trap it, so you wouldn't be able to. So both of them are talking about the offspring. But why in one case do we say it needs azmana, one it doesn't? Ha begina smucha la'il, ha begina sheina smucha. Meaning, where is this pardes? Is it close to the city? Is it close to where you are? Or is it not close to where you are? If it's close to where you are, right? So Rashi says, Yadaba v'datei laved, and you know about it, and you had it in mind. You could have. You don't need the specific designation, because you had it in mind. You knew about it. But if you didn't, So then no. So that's how we resolve. That's how we resolve the contradiction between those two cases. All right. Let's see the next Mishnah. Let's just start the Mishnah. Now we are dealing with. We've been talking about Seidah. We're talking about that. We're now going to talk about Shechita. Shechita. So we have. I think we've already seen it in the Gemara, but we have a principle that we said if you need to, even if you only need a kazait basar. Right, you're not going to eat the whole animal. You just want a small piece of meat, but you're allowed to shech the animal on Yom Tov because there's no way to get even a kazayit of meat without shechting the whole animal. Right, same way that we said you can fill up a whole pot of water and boil it, even though you just need a small amount because you're only doing one action. Here, the Mishnah talks about something else. Here, the Mishnah talks about a beima mesukenet. What happens if a person has a beima mesukenet, a terminal animal? Okay, so says Rashi, be'ema mesukenet. Well, not terminal, but it's an animal that has that's in danger, right? He says shu yaresh tamut. You're afraid that it's going to die. Ve'enot tzarich la shekvar sad surato. Okay, you've already eaten. If it's in the morning or if it's in time before Yom Tov, before you've eaten, you want to eat the animal on Yom Tov. There's no question. You can do the shechita in order to eat it. However, yeah, you don't actually want to eat it. Ela mechamat hefsedo shochet. Yeah, because you're worried the animal's going to die, and if the animal's going to die, I say not terminal because it's not a treifa, it's still a kosher animal. But if the animal's going to die by itself, then it's going to be just old or something like that, and then it's going to be a nevela, and you're not going to eat it, and it's going to be a big hefsed. But if you're able to do shechita, you have kosher shechita, you'll be able to eat the animal. What's the problem? The problem is you don't actually want to eat it now. So you're worried that before Yom Tov goes out, the animal's going to die, and then you won't be able to do the shechita after Yom Tov. Can you do the shechita on Yom Tov in order to save yourself the monetary loss? That essentially is the discussion. So it says, lo yishchot, ela hem ken yeshahut bayom lechol mimena kazayit tzli. Sli, why? Because that's the quickest way of cooking. But if there's enough time and you can come and you'll still feasibly be able to eat from the animal, kazayit, so then you can do the shechita. Even though your primary intention is not to have a loss, but you'll be able to eat and you'll eat a bit, that's okay. Rabbi Akiva Omer, afilu kazayit chai mibeit tvichata. Rabbi Akiva says, even if we're dealing with the amount that you could take some meat from the area of the shechita, right, from the neck, without having to skin the animal and do the whole thing, meaning that's a shorter amount of time. He says then you would be allowed to do that shechita. Shachta basadeh, if the animal's in the field in the shechita there, lo yivena b'mot uv'mota aval mevi biyado evarim evarim. If you're going to go and do the shechita in the field and you're carrying this animal along on the poles, and everybody's going to see that you're carrying this animal through, and it's very, very clear, it's very obvious that it was done really for to save the money, so that's not really appropriate, and that's a bit of a zilzul yom tov. But if you bring it, limb by limb, you bring it by hand, that would be okay. All right. Adkan, we'll talk about we'll do that Mishnah a bit more next week. Next week we will have a shiur, and we'll have two shiurim, and I think that will be the last before Pesach. I'll confirm with you.
Okay.
Sure.
Shabbat shalom, todah.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shkach.
Thank you, Rabbi. All right.